Alright guys, Battle for Zendikar has finally dropped on the Xbox, so here I am with the Simic Tempo deck for this season. I started Origins the same way. It's one of my favorite decks last season, but there were a lot of big holes in it. And I think that Battle for Zendikar has shored a lot of them up. And also, from what I understand from the Steam meta, ramp is a thing. And Acid Moss is everywhere. Haven't seen too much of it myself yet, but I'm sure people will catch on quickly. And this deck is basically designed to go underneath those decks, while still fighting opposing creature-based decks pretty well. So the first card, we're running all 4 copies of Clutch Occurrence. It's an unsummon, but it's not an instant. It's a sorcery, and it has Awaken 3 for 5, which we'll basically never use in this deck. It's just a cheap way to get something out of the way. The last deck played Disperse as its bounce spell of choice, but which is an instant, but it costs 2 mana instead of 1. So at least now on turn 3 we can bounce something and play out a 2-drop. And speaking of 2-drops, the last deck was a bit light on them. You know, we had Undercity Troll, which is amazing. But I was playing Elvish Visionary in that deck simply because there were no better options. I tried Welkin Turns, Timberpack Wolves, but they just really didn't. They really didn't get the job done. So I just played the Visionaries to make the deck a little bit smaller, more consistent, and it was pretty good. But it wasn't where I wanted to be. So Undercity Troll is obviously amazing. But now with Battle for Zendikar, we get to play with Snapping Gnarlid, which is you know, it's a 2-mana 2/2, but it has Landfall, and you know it gets +1/+1. So you play it on turn 2 as a 2/2, but it pretty much attacks as a 3/3 for every single turn for the first 3 or 4 turns after you play it, generally. So I mean, it's a pretty aggressive creature, and we're not looking to block with this deck anyway, so we don't care that he's a 2/2 on defense. And we also picked up Skyrider Elf, which on its own in a blue-green deck is a 2/2 flyer for 2 mana, excellent. And because of the X up there and the Converge, I put in a few of the new Tango lands. I think is the name that's been settled on for them. You know, the new lands anyway that come into play untapped if you have 2 or more basic lands. So I stuck in a couple of white sources and a couple of black sources, so it's possible to get this thing up to as big as a 4/4 in this deck. It's pretty Christmassy to get a 4/4, but a 3/3 shouldn't be too bad as long as we find one of those 4 lands that I've splashed in there. If we don't play this guy on turn 2, then later on in the game we can get a 3/3 flyer, and you know, like I say, in some strange circumstances we may even get a 4/4. So I'm still going to play Jessine Thief because card advantage. You know, this deck can still connect pretty good. There's only, I think, 8 or 9 excuse me, there's only 9 non-creature spells, but still, she's a threat and she needs to be blocked in order to not, you know, let the card advantage spiral out of control. And because of some of the, you know, we can play Clutch Occurrence, bounce her up to a 2/4, and remove the opposing creature. And we're playing some other, we're also playing Wild Size in here now, which is great with her. Turns her into a 4/6 trample, draw 2 cards, which is amazing. So we're going to stick with her. I'm going to play I'll stick with all 4 copies of Frostlinks because we have so many good 2-drops now. You know, ideally, if you have a choice between the Elf, the Gnarlid, and the Troll, I think you probably want to play Gnarlid first. Just because, I mean, it's good to have the Regenerate on this guy. But you want to prioritize these 2 and save your Elf for later. Unless your opponent played a Peerless Mirror and you want to go over the top of it or something. You know, that could be a little bit different. But generally, Elf is just, you know, it's a redundant 2-drop that scales along with the game in case you hit that other color of mana. And so you play one of those excellent 2-drops, the Gnarlid or the... what's its name? Let's have to go back. Undercity Troll. And then you just tap down the next guy and add a 2/2 and swing for 2 or 3. And renown your guy or just hit for 3. So it's just a really good card. And of course, Bounding Krasis is the reason to play this deck in the first place, back in the Origins meta. But now, actually, I mean, the rest of the deck, honestly, would be good without it. But I mean, it's a 3/3 flash for 3 mana, and it taps a dude down or untaps one of your dudes if you want to ambush a couple of guys from the opposing side. So he's just as good as ever. And now we're going to play 3 Wild Size in the deck, since we're a lot more aggressive now than we were before. Slapping down a turn 2 creature and swinging through a Jaddy Offshoot, or a Gatecreeper Vine, or a Peerless Mirror, or whatever, and then just slamming this down, cycling it, and plus pushing through some damage. The Trample is relevant because this deck can do a nice bit of damage early on, and this can finish out a game, or just remove that pesky 2-drop blocker. So that's good. Also, we're going to stick with Whirler Rogue because the card is just busted. You know, if you get board wiped, then you just play this and you get 3 bodies back, 2 of them have flying. Plus, it just lets some of your creatures go through unblocked. Speaking of board wipes, I was thinking about counterspells in this deck, in this Wild Size slot. But since the meta isn't really established yet, you know, the only reason I would ever want to counterspell in this deck, I think, is for the Planar Outburst, Radiant Flames, and Languishes of the World. So if that, you know, if control becomes a heavy part of the meta, then these Wild Sizes probably go. And you put in the 3 mana counterspell, not Scatter to the Winds, but the other one that I can't remember the name right now, but it's 3 mana and counter the target spell unless its controller pays 4. So you would put that in there just so that to protect your board a little bit. Also, we're going to play Woodland Wanderer, just like I said with the Skyrider Elf. If you just cast it for 2 colors of mana, you're getting a 4/4 Vigilant Trample for 4 mana, which is fine. It's actually really good value for 4 mana, but you know we've got the other 2 colors snuck in here, so we can realistically expect to, you know, usually maybe get a 5/5 Vigilant Trampler for our 4 mana, and in the odd Christmas Land scenario, we'll get a 6/6, which is just insane. And one of the things this deck likes to do, obviously, is race. And the vigilance on this guy really helps because you can push in for trample damage, and your opponent can't swing back into you because you got a huge blocker. So it's really, really good. And we've got Adverse Conditions. 2 copies of this. We could play 3, but I think 2 is fine since it's a 4-drop and it doesn't impact our board very much. I want to play as few non-creature spells as possible. But it's an instant 4 mana. It's basically Frost Breath. You tap 2 dudes, they don't untap. So you do it on your opponent's turn, but you get a Scion, and actually, you know, so Frost Breath is 3 mana, this is 4, but you get 1 mana back in the form of the Scion, except that mana can attack for you, and after you tap down 2 guys, that 1 point of damage has actually been relevant for me, so, you know, to tap down a couple of blockers, and that extra body really matters to sometimes swing off the edge and get lethal. You know, you can always slap a Wild Size on a Scion and no one see it coming. But, you know, it's really all about the tapping. And the instant speed tapping, not untapping. It's just a great spell. And instead of Outland Colossus as our 5-drop of choice, I've gone with Guardian of Tazim. It's a 4/5 flyer. I mean, Colossus is great, but it doesn't have evasion. This guy does. He still dodges Languish and Reeve Soul, but I don't know if those are going to be huge players in the format. Either way, he's got a fine body and evasion for his cost, and his ability's great. So we're going to play him in the 5-drop slot. So that's the deck. You know, 27 creatures, 9 spells. Pretty aggressive deck. You know, still got the tapping and the bouncing theme. No Separatist Void Mage anymore. You know, no Visionaries. None of the filler cards that we needed to flesh out the deck last time. So it's gotten a lot stronger, in my opinion. This card is really good here. So as far as the mana base goes, let's look at. I'm going to play. We get a lot of landfall in here, so I'm playing 1 Evolving Wilds and 2 Lumbering Falls as my 3-tap lands. And what Evolving Wilds let you do is, you know, trigger landfall twice in 1 turn, or trigger it at instant speed on your opponent's turn if for some reason you need to do that. So you play the wilds on your turn, crack it on theirs, and you can trigger Guardian of Tazim or whatever. You can block with the 2/2 Snapping Gnarl and make it a 3/3 at instant speed. It's rare, especially with only 1 copy in the deck, but it could come up. Obviously, we're going to play Hinterland Harbors because we're playing blue and green, and this is the check land. And Lumbering Falls, we just talked about, is amazing because it's a hexproof man land, so we get a 3/3 creature, which is exactly what this deck wants some of the time, just to, you know, you cast Adverse Conditions at the end of your opponent's turn, you get a 1/1, and then you untap, activate your Lumbering Falls, and all of a sudden you got 2 extra bodies on the field, and they've got 2 tap down, so I mean, that's just a really big swing in terms of pushing through some damage there. And as far as the basics go, I'm running 9 forests and 6 islands. But I'm also running these 4 islands, the 2 Sunken Hollows and the 2 Prairie Streams. So they count for islands for Guardian of Tazim. They count for islands when Hinterland Harbor checks to see whether or not, which is why, you know, they call it check lands. But you know, if you play a turn 1 Tango, you can play a turn 2 check, and it'll come in untapped, which is really good. But you know, so we get to sneak in 2 white sources and 2 black sources. So that's because of the Converge. So if we just get 1 of those, Skyrider Elf now can be cast as a 3/3, and Woodland Wanderer can be cast as a 5/5. If we get lucky and get 1 of each, 1 white and 1 black, then all of a sudden this can be a 6/6, and this can be a 4/4. So it's pretty good, and considering that we're running 15 basics plus an Evolving Wilds, these things are, you know, there's only 4 of them in here. They're basically always going to come into play untapped. The only time you'd ever play it tapped is on the first turn, really, and it's not very often that you're going to want to do that even. So I was trying the deck with Scythe Leopard in here. He was great on turn 1, you know. Let's go to the filters and say green, 1 mana, common, uncommon creatures. And Scythe Leopard is a 1-drop 1/1 with landfall, so he kind of plays the same role as this Snapping Gnarlid. And going Leopard into Gnarlid is pretty fucking strong, I gotta say. It is a vicious start. But since he's uncommon and we're not playing any other 1-drop creatures, he's pretty inconsistent to actually land a 1-drop. So I would rather play my mana base a bit more, you know, with some of these duels and get to play the Evolving Wilds rather than rely on the Leopard when you draw him, you know, later on in the game. He just doesn't do a whole lot. So I was playing without the Jessie and Thieves, but I've slotted her back in because if you look at the curve, it's still pretty good. We get Those 4 one-mana spells are just the bounce spells. We got 10, 13, 7, 2, mostly creatures, so that's a fairly decent curve. And the wild sizes, again, you know, even though those are 3-drops, you know, we're not playing that on curve very often unless there's a Peerless Mirror that we really just want to get out of the way and trample over and take 2 to the face rather than lose our dude. I mean, it'll happen, but you know, at the end of the day, wild size is a bit of a later game card to push through the damage, or if you're stuck on land, you'll just wild size a dude and just hope to get a little bit deeper and hit your land drop. So, but yeah, this is where I am with Simic Tempo. So I'm going to upload this now, and as soon as I get it live, I'll get in the lobbies and I'll start some games. So hopefully in about an hour, I'll have some games for you guys. And thanks for watching. And hopefully this deck does what it's supposed to do when we finally put it underneath the bright lights. All right, guys, thanks for watching.